should be an easy one. Move down the creek.
Everything side of the river, everything, they were excited about it, they sat out so long.
Yeah.
How's it going?
It's an interesting juxtaposition of drought declaration and rainy weather.
Never a dull moment, never a dull moment. Jim's probably gonna be late because of work.
Okay. Well, we can begin then. And it looks like Director Houston is beginning. How's that for starting up a meeting? Mr. Houston, I have a question for you. Now we're in session. Have you had much involvement with the 1/10 of 1% for the OBHC?
For the what?
1/10 of 1% that we provide for OBHC. Have you had any involvement?
Not a lot, some. It came up in discussion before you all came on board.
Okay. Because I just heard of STOCK, this sales tax advisory committee or sales tax. There is a committee that actually provides us with guidance in terms of how
I
the money's spent.
believe that's accurate. And I believe it's comprised of OBHD and, shoot, I can't remember, the court, not deferred,
right,
shoot, I can't remember the title I had in my head a second ago, the substance abuse,
yeah.
all of those
Yeah.
folks have members served,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And,
okay,
now, I don't know how often they meet, or I know the previous board was taking an interest in all of that and how those monies were allocated out.
so the contract for that is, 5-year contract, and so 90 days before the contract, is the way I'm reading it, ends, that OBHC is supposed to come to us and propose to renew the contract. So that would have been in January,
I believe that's accurate,
so we're,
probably behind.
yeah, well, and then they terminated their director, so that may be an additional reason they're behind.
Okay, hadn't heard that, so.
That's all been stewing.
I just was curious how much you knew about it.
There was, just say the previous board lent some scrutiny to how that money was allocated for a variety of reasons. But,
Okay.
and I kind of drifted in and out of that discussion.
We should get Dave and have a discussion about that, I think.
Did you want to go ahead and get started, or?
Yeah, I think so. Jim was at court, so he may be delayed.
Oh, okay. A couple of things, catch up from past discussions. You asked Commissioner about the solid waste conditional use permit application. They have not submitted that. They're still working on it, was the response we got, so
Okay.
I don't know precisely what they're still working on, but that was the results of our inquiry.
Okay, well, I will take it a little further and talk to Kent. I've been talking to him about possibly going over to Olympia tomorrow, but that's not gonna happen, so I'll bring it up.
Okay.
Because
Then we chatted a couple of weeks ago now about conditional use permit amendment 2019-1. That's the one up on cannabis operation on Windy Ridge Road, I guess you call it, up off Pine Creek. That's actually, it's the conditional use permit was issued in 2017 for cannabis grow. They were applying to expand their operation. They have water, they have the fencing, they have all the facilities in place. Along came the code change, and they have elected to terminate their conditional use permit and move ahead just as a permitted use, which they can in their zoning. So, the result of which is now an administrative review. We've actually completed SEPA on the proposal. The appeal period expired Friday. We have prepared the notice canceling the public hearing, which had been scheduled for the 25th of this month, and indicating we'll move ahead with the administrative review of their application.
So when they say an expansion of their operation, what does that mean?
They're adding a bigger footprint.
How can they, so what license do they have?
They were operating under a tier 3. It sounds like they're going to co-locate another licensee, which they can do. They have irrigation and a water right through Enos Lake. So they have enough water.
So who keeps track of how much they have?
Pardon?
Who keeps track of how many square feet they have?
Well, the state has their own licensing inspection. We go up from time to time.
And does each farm, what I heard in all that, public review there, when we were looking at the cannabis regulations, I heard that each farm has to have its own individual, place to store it and things like that. Like their own individual.
Well, I know they
buildings.
have to have separation from each licensee. So that's where you generally see the segment, what I call cross fencing, if you were talking about livestock, within the footprint of their operation.
So does each licensee, they'll have to have their own infrastructure?
I believe that's accurate, but they generally have a shared, like, water source, if they have.
Right.
An irrigation system or something, but they, as I understand it, based upon the inspections we've done, each one kind of operates autonomously from the others. So they all have their own employees, they all have their own footprint, they all have their own license, they all have their own.
So do we have a ground coverage requirement, or not a requirement, but a covered area requirement on parcels?
No, you recall we elected not to put a ceiling in terms of a lot coverage requirement, or how much, how many, maybe a better way to say it, licenses could co-locate.
Impervious service requirements. If I have if I have my own lot, my household, domestic lot, is there a maximum amount of roof that I can put on my lot?
In the Medhow Review District, there is. In the rest of the county, there is not.
If I got a 5-acre lot over here, I can put 5 acres of rooftop over top.
Theoretically, if you meet your lot line setback.
And we don't have any stormwater runoff stuff, right?
We will implement DOE's requirements if you have enough ground disturbing activities, and we have a permit process, keeping in mind we don't have a clearing and grading ordinance, so unless it's attached to some kind of a permit application, in which case we will generally condition it for stormwater discharge. So, just to let you know, I'm sure there'll be some angst when we get the notice sent out. Commissioners now can respond to those questions. They are still operating within the requirements of Okananga County Code.
So this is an entirely new application, then?
Pardon?
This is treated as an entirely new application.
Well, essentially, I've brought the SEPA forward since we just issued it. It'll be we'll publish a notice of final decision when we get to that point. But we'll treat it essentially as, it's not even really a change of use, because they already had the previously approved conditional use permit. What I wanted to avoid, they wanted to move ahead as a permitted activity, which obviously they could do. But I wanted to avoid having part of the parcel under a CUP and part of the parcel not. So in order to do that, I required that they terminate the conditional use permit and then operate as a permitted activity. Now, we've already conducted SEPA, so we're implementing those conditions in terms of road surfacing and those sorts of things. We'll go through the final point of the review. All that was left was the public hearing. We'll go through and complete the review, issue a notice of final decision, so there'll still be an appeal opportunity.
But the SEPA's for the whole.
Well, the SEPA, we had the previous SEPA conditions in place. The SEPA was done based upon the expansion, so cumulative impacts, but it was directed specifically to the expansion proposal. So in that, this, again, that's been completed, the appeal period ended Friday, unless something comes in the mail today. We didn't have an appeal, so we'll go ahead and move ahead with the review. Let's see. 49, watershed planning unit, the contract between you and the Conservation District came over a week or so ago. I have some new hard copies for you, they're not changed. The budget they have prepared is consistent, actually a couple $1,000 short of the amount budgeted in the grant for facilitation. They've actually now taken over the facilitation of the meetings. So I've dated the contract back to the award of the funding. You'll recall that we actually, in our contract agreement, we're going to reach back, we're preparing the billing, we'll reach back to January of 2018. They don't have expenses back from January 2018, but we do, and arguably the initiating government, so.
So we're contracting back to January 1st, 2018 with the facility?
No, we're only going back to February of 2019.
February 2019.
Right. They have not signed yet. I haven't heard back from Craig in terms of when he's going to put it in front of their board. Whatever the, did you find something that's amiss?
I was thinking, maybe it was a similar looking one, but I thought maybe this had already gotten signed.
Oh,
Is it,
okay, fair enough. Was on the consent agenda?
we have,
I mean, it's the exact same agreement, so I guess I perhaps I forgot or didn't know.
I've been gone a week, so I might.
Understood,
be
nope,
not
completely
as fresh,
understand.
But
I've been here in my head.
here it is,
Yep,
420,
yep, the authorizations.
oh, 402, last
So you did sign it? Okay.
week.
Well, then you're looking at another copy of the contract you've already.
Same thing? It's the same thing, okay.
Same contract, same exact thing.
Well, then we're,
It was nice.
So that, by way of update, I guess, for the watershed planning effort, the group has elected to have the technical advisory group meet and begin to discuss what we're calling data gaps, additional information that likely the planning unit will need to have to complete their work, as well as a initial, not really review, but more of a listing of potential projects for mitigations. There's already some actually listed in the old plan that have come up. Mr. Culhane from the Department of Ecology in his presentation last week actually went through some of those. And I mostly just identified the fact that they're in the existing plan. So my crew has assumed the task of putting that meeting together, so we'll get that set up and go from there. The idea is there's some concern that with the monthly meeting for the planning unit, we're gonna bunch up against the deadline towards the end of this. So they wanted to get some subcommittee work started on some of these projects, or one part of these tasks, I suppose I should say. And the technical advisory group seemed like a good spot to begin the discussion, potential projects. So everyone was in agreement. So we'll set that up and push that discussion forward.
Well, it's good to have considered what was in the plan earlier, just to get those out of the way.
It looked like there was an amendment to that that had been signed as well. Is that,
No, shouldn't have been.
no, that part didn't.
talking about the other contract for,
Washington State.
Well,
Conservation.
we had an amendment to the VSP contract. That may be what you, the commissioner signed an amendment for additional funding with the Conservation Commission
Mhm.
for voluntary stewardship,
Okay.
24,000 and
that's
change.
right.
And then we have the new, and actually, now that you bring that up, we'll have to get a contract with the Conservation District, or rather an amendment to their contract for the additional funding. And then we have the new contract for the facilitation for RIA 49. So, but we'll sort through it, we'll get it. So what we're talking about,
Committee, we're about done with that.
the
We
fourth,
just- yeah.
well, the technical advisory group,
Yeah.
right? The one thing that, well, we'll sort through it. I mean, we're still in that discussion between the old plan and what we have to do with the new tasking and all of that, but we'll just continue that discussion. And I guess go from there. For your next installment, or for the next meeting, you have a new installment of the buildable lands analysis. So we've already started putting that together, polishing it up. So we'll be ready to go with that presentation. So I think we're moving along. I think last Thursday's meeting was productive, the meeting before was productive. We have some things to work out before we get down to the nitty gritty, but I think we will. I think we'll meet the deadline myself, so. Under the banner of the comprehensive plan, Commissioner, how did you want to go about the briefing? I didn't check, well, we kind of didn't anticipate our meeting today, so we didn't check Dave's availability or.
Should probably do an executive session on
Fair
that.
enough, okay, so. What I will mention is that I went through the meeting with the planning commission schedule. So my intent at this point is to go ahead and at their April meeting, begin the actual, if you will, line by line review of the comprehensive plan. We'll start that discussion with the planning commission. They've already received, or should have already received, the scoping comments. And whether I'll have the draft EIS ready to publish or not, I'm not sure, but we'll have a good running start at it. And we'll begin to share that with them as well. So to a point, we're on schedule. We'll do the April meeting. We already set a special meeting in May because of the Memorial Day holiday. And then we'll see if they want to schedule one between May and June, the regular June meeting, to continue that discussion. So the planning commission actually has laid out a pretty good schedule, and I'm guessing we'll have some additional special meetings in there to keep the discussion moving along. But so far, so good. One thing I do, and this is moving into your next subject, and actually the last three subjects to a point are all interrelated. The critical areas ordinance, of course, as you know, we're actually already in our 1-year extension for the 2018 update. We talked some time ago about how the commissioners wanted to conduct that review. We didn't necessarily lay out a roadmap, but we did begin that discussion. You recall I had Angie send out that comparison, that memo that outlined the differences between the 2012 now draft, which was really the last one anybody has looked at, versus the critical areas ordinance currently on the books.
Is the 2012 draft the only proposed amendment or only working document since the critical areas ordinance was last adopted?
Yes, the 2012 draft was the draft the board at the time was actually poised, if you will, to adopt. And then circumstances came about and they did not do that. And we really haven't dug into it since.
Did it follow the same format as the previous?
For the most part, it made some changes, some argued significant, some argued not enough. What it did, the biggest change in it was it pulled out a lot of the language, the critical areas ordinance you have on the books right now says that it can't be enforced unless it's hooked to some kind of a permit application. And we just ignore that, frankly. And if you have a violation, we react to it. But that came out, some of the setbacks and whatnot. The effort was to try to make them consistent with the Shoreline Master Program, but keeping in mind that that was the Shoreline Master Program under discussion at that time. The one that's been adopted now, the critical areas ordinance has not been, or vice versa, has not been compared to the adopted Shoreline Master Program. So whatever success that effort netted has to be re-examined, because we have a different Shoreline Master Program than the one that was under discussion at that time. So that has not been done. So I guess the question is, before the commissioners wanted, not this board, previous board, wanted an advisory committee to work on it, and in fact one was put together. They came up with some changes, and that's the last anybody has met to talk about it. Commissioners want to put something like that together again. Do you want to do more as you did with the comprehensive plan and take that first look yourselves? Any ideas in terms of how you wish to proceed? The reason I ask is I have a hope that we can get the comprehensive plan done, and rather than, and this is up to the commissioners too, rather than then pick up the zone code, move through it, and then pick up critical areas and move through it, and then pick up subdivision and move through it, we can do some review on a concurrent basis.
Which would be good.
I mean, that's the idea being, if you have the direction out of the comprehensive plan, to a point, the rest is consistency review. So I just opened the discussion. What are your thoughts?
Good part of that is that when you're looking at the critical areas ordinance and yeah, the consistencies between the next thing you know, you're either having to go back and make some adjustments to the critical areas ordinance and the zoning possibly. If the comp plan's laid out well enough, we should be able to look at all three of them as implementing regulations. And just, you know, you talked about the Shoreline Master Program and looking for the consistency there, and we're talking about those when it comes to the shoreline part of it. You're looking at those areas that aren't covered by the Shoreline Master Program, but looking for consistencies with that. Yeah.
Right, right.
I think one thing that would be good is, because I'm just sitting here thumbing through the Commerce's critically see, you know, okay, what are we really, you know, looking for? What are we doing? What are the things we have to do? What are the things that we can do? Just so everybody kind of has you know, a good idea of what we're looking at or for.
Tutorial.
Yeah.
Well, we can use that as kind of a kickoff, if you will. Board level, I assume we're talking about.
Yeah.
Have you heard from Commerce, their short course planning effort?
You know, just this morning I saw a schedule and we weren't on it.
Okay.
So actually I had a note to come and see you about that and see what,
Okay.
because as I recall, they kind of had it on their radar
You
screen,
did?
but it didn't show up.
Because I think that, what's the guy's name?
Sir, Ben?
Yeah, Sarah. We're supposed to start talking to you about it.
Okay. Well, let me
Might get ahold of Ben.
Maybe I'll get a hold of him and, cause they had one scheduled in the end of April, but it wasn't here.
29th or 30th was
Okay,
what we talked about. So I thought that possibly along the lines of what Commissioner Over's thinking, might be able to shove a little bit of the critical areas element in as the customized service.
well, well, not that new now, but they have a new handbook
Yeah.
for critical areas out. Ben sir offered to come up if we had something in particular we'd like him to do.
Well, maybe he should be a little bit of the handbook.
We could probably get him to come up and give a tutorial, if you will, on the handbook. I mean, that would certainly be in front of the board, but we could expand the attendance. So kind of, use your phrase, kind of a mini short course, I guess, tailored short course. I'll send him a note and see if maybe we can set that up in the next month or so.
Yeah, and I'll take the time to glance through the handbook and see what's changed since, or obvious changes since they had another one.
Angie started to do a summary of that. Let me check with her and see.
Oh, and in looking at our ordinance.
Let me see where she is on that. She got peeled off a little bit doing some of the work for the buildable lands analysis. Well, let me see
Yeah,
where she is with that. We'll if that's where the commissioner kind of wants to start, then, I'll work to put that together. And that can be our kickoff in terms of critical areas. The unrelated subjects, the critical areas ordinance, we need to review and eventually adopt. The zone code, obviously, needs to be reviewed for consistency. Sounds like the commissioners have no objection, I'll say it that way, to trying to coordinate those efforts, the critical area zone code subdivision in particular, on some kind of a concurrent path. But there are some things that have come up in conversation for a while now that the commissioners may be interested in looking at ahead of time. So, by way of example, what I'm handing you is an excerpt from 17A60, which is your R20 zone. The language is the same, R1, R5, R20, there's no difference. And I'm talking about density. Now, part of the discussion, or not discussion, part of the analysis, I should say, for your buildable lands, we're taking, while we're also doing the historic build out, we're also taking, eye of the beholder, I guess, but I'll call it the worst case scenario. What could possibly happen mathematically if all the land, somebody did what the zoning allowed you to do, if you will. Now we're talking mostly density.
So can I kind of go through this?
Sure.
Because this is something that I noticed that I thought was very, I don't know, I think it's an oxymoron almost in itself. So this is for our R20 zone. Okay, so density. Maximum of one single-family dwelling unit per 20 acres, except that one single-family dwelling unit and one accessory dwelling may be permitted on any lot so long as adequate provisions for water and septic are permitted. Okay, so we're saying that you can build one single-family house, except that you can also build an accessory dwelling as long as you got provisions for water and septic. But then, okay, so that's maximum. It says, uses the word maximum, the very first word in that thing is maximum. Then in B, it says maximum of 5 multifamily dwelling units, which, how many, so multifamily dwelling units. So what's a multifamily dwelling unit? What's the maximum number of families in a multifamily dwelling unit?
I don't believe our definitions have one, it just identifies 2 units or more.
Okay, so we have a maximum of 5 multifamily dwelling units, so that means, and that's, or mobile home park units per acre.
Correct.
So I can have 5 multifamily dwellings per acre on a 20-acre parcel.
According to your code.
So is a multifamily dwelling then like 2 families, 3 families, 4 families, 5 families? 10 families?
Definitions don't put a ceiling on it. Single family and then multifamily is 2 or more.
So theoretically, if I said that I was going to build, I have a 20-acre parcel. I was gonna build, I wanted to build 10-unit condominiums or apartments or something like that, so that 10 families could fit in there. I could put 5 of those per acre on my 20-acre parcel.
According to your code.
Okay. That does not. I mean, that's, we use the word maximum of 1 single family dwelling unit up here, and then we go down below and we say maximum of 5 apart, but you can only put 1 house and 1 accessory dwelling. But if you wanna build a whole bunch of stuff, then go ahead.
That's a problem.
I think it is. I honestly think that that's a problem, and I don't know if that was just a holdover from,
I think it's been a well-recognized problem by some for some time, but you didn't see a whole lot of it going on. Probably it's why.
so let me ask you a question as a planner. Where would you put multifamily, I mean, where would you say that,
I put multifamily where the cities are putting multifamily.
so 20-acre, do we have any, it would be nice to have our zone map out here to figure out where our R20s are, and our R5s. Our R5s say the same thing.
I wouldn't set that up.
Because I mean, if you want good, this to me, out in the 20-acre zoning way out in the boondocks, that does not make any sense.
The language, and I'd have to go back to remember part of the discussion. I know there's some mixing up of farm worker housing and just, if you will, run-of-the-mill multifamily housing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't wanna
No,
screw it up to where it's, somebody on a 5-acre parcel can't put in,
no.
farm worker
No,
housing.
understood. Our code does make a distinction, is just the point I made. We have different definitions for farm worker housing, different standards.
Oh, right.
Different set of requirements. But whether this was something that just was carelessly worded, or if it's just a holdover from the old minimum requirement district, I don't know. I don't remember.
Well, yeah, or if you think about it, if there's 5 or 20-acre zoning that's served by a city water supply, that's, on a transportation corridor,
See,
that's a little bit different.
You have other zones on the books to deal with this. You have your suburban residential zone, which actually is the zone created, well, I don't know if that's what was created, but that's how we use it now, to deal with multifamily, to deal with your smaller lots. But it's all predicated upon having a water system and a sanitary sewer. So, that's the zone.
And a transportation system that's appropriate to deal with that.
So that zone actually exists on the books, but it only exists, to the best of my memory, in one spot, and that's on the East Lake corridor, east side of Lake Soyuz. So, the point I'm wandering my way into, so let me give you the punchline first, and we'll come back and talk about it. You have zones on the books set up to deal with these sorts of things. But predisposition has been to use the old minimum requirement district and now the breakout, R1, R5, R20, to cover the bulk of the county. We always fixate on those zones. We don't get to the other zones, your industrial zones, your suburban residential zones, those other zones that have been set up to be put in places where this sort of thing is appropriate.
Yeah.
So,
And then, in thinking about this, it's like, okay, what happens if somebody who's, not too far out of town, someone wants to build a duplex? How do you, like I said, I think that this is, it's
That
silly.
suburban residential has provision for that, so.
it does.
Well, like I said, I think this is silly right here that says maximum of one single-family dwelling unit per 20 acres, and then it goes right down to the next sentence and it says, but you can build 5, however big you want, per acre, on as many acres as you want.
They would seem inconsistent. Birds of the same flock, if you will. Is your neighborhood commercial, which was the zone crafted to put in your LAMRs, to use GMA terminology, unincorporated towns and villages, as your comprehensive plan refers to them. Down under the banner, for your density, it's a fairly general statement about adequate water and septic. Your minimum lot size is 5,000 square feet. Now, all of the LAMRs were given the same zone, and the desire at the time was to surround the core, if you will, with what seemed to be a logical expansion area. Now, in the case of Malott, perhaps that worked, and in the case of Malott, this language maybe has some application, because you actually have some what I would call city lots in Malott. City lot generally runs 5,000, 7,000 square feet, give or take.
How big is this room, Laney? Is this 40 by 80?
I don't know.
I would say so.
That's about 40 by 80, so this thing has 32, this room has 3,200 square feet in it roughly. We don't need to measure it. I'm trying to get an idea of how big a 5,000 square
Well,
foot lot is.
with this room, you're probably getting the floor area of the house that fit on the 5,000 square foot lot.
50 by 100, when you have city lots of 5,000 square feet, generally it's a 50, and it paralleled in your code, it's 50-foot frontage requirement, 100 feet deep.
No, I know
Once-
that. I was just trying to look and see how.
Ellen, if you've driven through Ellensburg lately, if you actually look at the way the blocks are laid out, from a street front to the alley is generally 120 feet, sometimes a skosh less. So you're in your residential low density in Ellensburg is 7,000 square feet. So you have a 70-foot frontage by 100, sometimes 120. But the point I make here, and it's related to the point we were discussing in the other, we have one zone to cover all of the LAMRs. Malott is a considerably different LAMR than is Wakanda.
So does that have like Methow?
Town of Methow,
Methow,
Carlton,
Carlton,
Chesaw,
Mazama,
Mazama,
Chesaw,
Wakanda,
Loomis.
Ellsford.
Loomis, yeah.
So that, the point in some of those areas, for instance, Meadow has those little tiny lots right in the old town plat.
Right.
And part of this was you'll recall, Commissioner, there was a real sensitivity on the part of actually a couple of previous boards to create legal non-conforming lots. Well, it's now morphed into legal pre-existing lots, but there was some concern about putting that label, if you will, on existing parcels. So where you're 5,000 square foot in the lot, whether it makes sense or not, at least it's on the ground now. That's what's been there for quite some time. In Wakanda, it really doesn't work. because that would be a pretty extensive water system, sanitary sewer system to put that kind of density in Wakanda. But that's what the zones are. So, kind of back to the discussion, you have the same zone scattered around in different spots that don't necessarily have any real similarities, then you run into potential challenges. Now, the counter to that is, it's been on the books for, 3 years now, and nothing's happened anywhere. But you do have at least some potential for conflict.
So you have some that develop, and I'm talking about, there's some of those like Crazy Acreage, Seeds Grove, those are little sort of almost, well, they're like Lamberts. And they have had developed troubles with their water systems. You know, they don't have sewer systems. They're relying on septic systems. And so those are things just to keep in mind on the expansion of such areas. But I think Andy's right in terms of having, when we have our discussions, we're looking at a map all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough for me to, because, you know, like, I mean, I was, because I drove through Carlton the other day. Carlton, if there were going to be development in a area where you could provide services or something like that, Carlton, you know, there's a lot of flat area there. I mean, it's a decent area for development. Now, Meadow has that little tiny, I mean, Meadow packed up against the, you know, the hill, and then you got a little bit of area there. But, you know, up here, I don't, you know, it's hard for me to envision, okay, well, how much area is encompassed by these things? How many lots are there that are 5,000 square foot lots can you create, you know, around Chesaw?
Well, let me take you then to the final question. I mean, you're in your comprehensive planning process. This will be a discussion the planning commission has at some subsequent date. The policies will derive from that. If that's a path the commissioners want to stick to, then we've had an informational discussion and we can go on from there. If the commissioners want to do some things on an interim basis, and you'll recall that at least in a couple of the scoping comments, there's concern that between now and when whatever happens, a lot of things can happen in between. Whether they will or not, a lot of things could. So are there some things on an interim basis that commissioners are interested in doing? If the answer is you want to talk about it, then we can certainly put together some displays and do some comparisons in terms of where the different zoning is, in terms of how the different landmarks have been laid out, and see if you want to do some things before we get to the rest of the review process.
So the 5,000 acre square foot lot, I'm a lot less, I would like to talk about it, but I need more information to, you know, visually. This one, Jim, you know, reading this, I mean, and I'd like to see some pitfalls too, you know, if we just said, you know, in 5s and 20s, we need to get rid of this, or, you know, and then possibly rezone areas if, you know, if there's opportunity for duplexes or triplexes or, you know, whatever, fourplexes or whatever. But to have this just out there to where a 20 acre lot, wherever, can just, you know, it's, I think it's doesn't need to be there because you would have to provide for, you know, water, septic, all those things. And then it puts the onus on the county to try to provide services if you're way, way up there, you know, to cover, you know, your fire needs, your EMS needs, and all those other things for this real high density block that anybody can build. So, I'm interested to hear what Commissioner Dietrich has to say. Maybe we should look at it.
There's two approach, well, probably more than two, but at any rate, two distinctive approaches to take. And the approach Okanogan County is taken fairly consistently is to allow a lot of flexibility in the zones. For the most part, you can call that the right to ask zoning. And then it's all project-specific review, and you try to shoehorn whatever in to that spot. Or you can have more specificity in your zoning. Now, some will argue that denigrates flexibility. Perhaps that's correct. Others, however, will tell you that the more specific your zoning, the more opportunity you have to plan what you want to do. And you heard this same discussion with the cannabis people. You know, the idea that you could kind of sort of put it anywhere maybe hasn't necessarily worked out. So the idea of coming up with more specific criteria to identify where it can go, I mean, obviously if you had your heart set on a spot and it doesn't work, well then that's a problem. However, if you're looking for a spot to site, it gives you more opportunity to find one with a greater likelihood of success. And a lot of zoning can and arguably should work that way. If you have areas laid out where that kind of density is appropriate, you zone it that way. And then people who want to do that kind of development know where to go.
Yeah, and again, I don't wanna take away efficiency either. Because if a duplex is a reasonable building to put on a parcel, I don't wanna take away people's ability to do that, but number one, we don't even have a definition of what a multi-family, I mean, unless we do, and we just don't know where it is, what a multi-family dwelling is, if there's a maximum or
More than one.
just more than one.
And that doesn't also call out, some do, some don't, whether or not they're detached or when it calls 5-unit.
Right, does that mean they're all, that's 5 multi-unit things connected, does it mean they're, well, it says.
You know, this is kind of funny, but this map right back here is a really good representation. That's rural planning, that's rural county land right there. And that was minimum requirement district, it still in essence is because of, what is it, probably the highest density zone is applied there, right? And you got an industrial area, a sawmill there, lots of fruit processing there, another sawmill right there. We had a person move in right there that challenged the growth of that industrial area that's been there ever since the railroad came to town. And then these areas are here, all in floodplain. And it's interesting to think about how in history these things developed, because, you know, you can buy a lot cheaper right there. It's in the floodplain. You don't have to hook to any of the sewer. But here's the city infrastructure over here. And this is where it began to grow without these grids of 2-acre blocks, because that's what a block is, 2 acres. And then you got 5,000 square foot lots, and a lot of those. These were adaptable to the zoning. The zoning is a single-family residential zoning, and it allows up to 10,000 square foot. Actually, that's down to 5, but that's what was in demand. Those are little short flats all along the fringe of the city, just out of the floodplain. But this in here is a mix of uses that it's been very low value, filled with places people live, but it's always been a area of consternation all the time, because we don't want to be a part of the city, and for good reason. You don't have to pay a bill, but there's issues that come up with septic systems, those sorts of things. But that's just a good example of real incompatible land uses all over the board right now in one spot. And so that's where, in an area where next to a city, you would typically go with what they did on East Lake, and that was suburban zoning, or else, you know, it's destined to be annexed in the city, but really the city is oftentimes reluctant to annex floodplain property and then apply urban development standards in it to allow more density in the floodplain. The city of Oroville, in fact, adopted a subdivision code provision that says unless you can have 5,000 square feet of buildable land outside the floodplain, that you couldn't do a subdivision. Which then you get into this thing where, you know, we're talking about flexibility and efficiency. If you got it out there and you gotta go and apply for something that may be marginal, you don't know what's gonna come out the other end. So when it comes to efficiency and just zoning and planning and in that process, it's like, okay, you allow this, we're gonna put it on the table. Then you put SEPA up, and then you throw up these roadblocks because there's problems with the area. It's not site specific or zoning district specific. So really, the flexibility that you think you have turns out to be a problem. I mean, even during the permitting process, it's like, okay, I bought this piece of land, it says I can do this stuff, and you're not gonna let me do this stuff. And so it puts the county at risk, and it also puts the purchaser at risk, because, you know, they may not know all this stuff. So I like to use that one right there only because I did a lot of work right there, and I'm real familiar with it, but there were things that popped up all the time. And there's some farmer housing there that was built. You know, you got your industrial and you got some heavy commercial there.
Yeah, I mean, there's areas where I'm, you know, I just think, okay, you know, out, what's a good road? Oh, the road that goes up from Pateros there,
Indian Dan.
no, not Indian Dan.
Bill Shaw?
Bill Shaw Road. Yeah, Bill Shaw Road. You know, honestly, you know, Bill Shaw's a pretty wide road right there until you get up, you know, a little bit past there. But, you know, would a duplex be okay out there? Yeah, probably. I mean, it's closer to town. You know, I don't think it'd be a bad place for one. So, I mean, I can't remember, do you remember, Dan, is that 5s up there, or is that 20s up there?
20s.
20s up?
And what, you know, a duplex.
Well, yeah, it's 20s in that ranch that they
Yeah.
split up, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, I wanna make sure that we're not limiting things that are, you know, efficient, good uses and things like that, but at the same time, this just is like a free-for-all.
The two
And
components.
just like what Commissioner Branch just said, it's like, okay, I read this zoning and I say, okay, I can build 5 of these per acre, so I'm gonna buy a 20-acre lot, and I'm gonna go and build me 5 or 25 fourplexes on this thing. And then I'll figure out how to get water and sewer.
And then the planning department says, okay, well, let's fill out this checklist. And the next thing you know,
Yeah,
you're going, well, what is the you know the questions on the checklist, right? What's the transportation system? You know, what's your estimated average daily traffic? It's like, and then the planning department goes, well, we're not sure if your development's gonna work here,
right,
right?
and it says it right here.
Yeah, so it is that part where, in fact, you know, when you're doing SEPA on the whole comprehensive plan, if you see consistencies like that, that's where you begin to go, well, I don't know, we're gonna do that at the project level. Well, you can do it at the project level, but you're setting yourself up for a lot of extra work and
Two components, as you know, to the zone code. One's the text, one's the map. The text tends to have fixated on lot size. And that in turn has driven the composition of the map. There's probably more that we ought to look at.
As far as interim measures, I think that we're moving along here at a fairly decent pace with a, you know, new comprehensive plan. There's a few things, like that one in particular, those 5,000 acres, that I think we should probably look at in the interim, just to make sure that No matter what, even if we weren't in the middle of a comprehensive plan, that just doesn't seem consistent to me. So it'd be something that I'd be interested in looking at. We've already, taken water issues in 49 and 48 and gone, okay, we can't divide, land in a lot of these areas because we don't understand the water portion of it yet. I think that we're taking interim measures, to respond specifically to, somebody saying, well, we think that there should be no more, and I don't know if anybody said this, but, we don't think there should be any more subdivision, period, until you guys get to your comprehensive plan. No, I don't think so. But I think that if we keep
Sometimes if you address this end of it, it's,
well, that's what I'm saying, if we keep an open mind, and if we go, hey, and if people come to us and say, hey, we see an inconsistency going on here, and you look at it, and not even in, not even in light of the comprehensive plan, I think that it just creates an inconsistency.
Well, sound like Commissioner's interested in furthering the discussion, so let me go ahead and put together some examples.
so there's three components that I'd like to try to look at as much as we can, as often as we can. One, if we had the zoning map here just in the room, I think it always gives everybody the opportunity to walk over to it and go, oh,
Yeah.
what's that zone? I mean, even us, I constantly, and
Okay.
it's just, and then the other part is the use chart, because the use chart is a tool, just used to summarize the zoning code and what's allowed in the areas. And then the text itself, but between the use chart and the map, you can see a lot real quick. And then you can go to the text, get your reading desires all filled.
Yeah.
And then definitions, then you're able to look at those, because that's something you brought up here, it's like, what is that? And
Right.
you're looking at it.
Related in terms of our discussion here, and I suggested Title 14, I've since changed my mind. It would more properly go into 12 or 15, depending upon how you would approach it if you wish to, and how much focus you put on it. And that's a clearing and grading ordinance. Comes up from time to time. The one activity where, in my opinion, it would be useful is road construction. Right? And I don't mean driveways, I mean road construction. What we've had problems with in past is folks start building roads, getting ready for some kind of project, but they haven't applied for anything. So once they do apply, of course, it falls under the review of planning and public works, and occasionally the Department of Ecology. But the project above Burma Road is the classic example where then they had to change a bunch of stuff because it wasn't built to the proper standard. So part of it's a regulatory approach, but on the other hand, part of it would work in the favor of whomever wants to do whatever they're doing if they actually were required to interact with public works planning before they started doing any road building, so that whatever they did build would be built to the standards necessary, commensurate with whatever they're going to do. We don't have that on the books.
So I was thinking about that this morning driving over here. Because I was trying to think of, because I know of a gentleman who built a road up the side of a hill because he's got cattle that range, up in the back, and it's steep. He wanted to be able to safely get his side-by-side, up to where he ranges cattle. So, while I see that it would be important in you know, in the residential creation of a road, where do we keep it to where, you know, if I'm building my 2-track up to the back of my place to get water to my cattle, and somebody driving along the road turns me in, because we have a clearing and grading ordinance, where's that balance?
We'll set it up by classification. I mean,
Agricultural?
county has classifications of roads. Primitive road, class C, B, A. Whatever they're building, I mean, the application process can be tiered accordingly. Create an exception.
Well, the
If they're
application,
building a primitive road for agricultural purposes, they just have to meet their stormwater discharge, which probably they should be anyway. If they're disturbing more, the book says 5 acres, but actually DOE will come and look at it sometimes if they disturb more than an acre where it's road construction. That's not a very long road. And you can set that kind of a threshold in terms of what totally ground disturbance you're doing, what are you building the road for?
that steep slope, remember you talked about steep slopes?
This is exactly what, yeah, this is a steep slope that he built.
And, you know, I remember a time when a guy, I was doing a logging job over by Spokane, a guy come out and he said, I'd like to get to the lower part of my property to get my wood. And he goes, so I was just next door and had a piece of scat, build me a road. And I said, you know, it's back in the day, you know, of course, it's like, I go, well, that's pretty steep and your property's this wide, so it's gonna be a steep road. Oh, that's okay, you know, I'm just gonna drive my Jeep down there and get my wood and go back up. And I said, well, it isn't gonna last very long. And that was the biggest issue right there, really, is that I built his road for him. And in those days in the county, in Spokane County, even they didn't have any cut and fill enforcement. I don't know if they didn't have any regulation, but there wasn't any critical area stuff, like, you know, steep slopes. And the road, you know, it did take the next spring, and the road washed out, and it moved a lot of soil down below, and it really looked, it looked bad. But the other part of it is that these roads began to get built for whatever reason, and then it's enough to get yourself into trouble. And so in my estimation back then, I wish I would have known a little bit about the rules, because I might have been in trouble. I got so far with something that I didn't know the rules, and I did a lot of disturbing the landscape before I found out what the rules were, and that's, you see, this is a development right here that not everybody can see, but this is on the lake shore of Lake Osoyoos, and there's a couple or 3 roads now leading down to that area. There's a shoreline master program that deals with those, but nothing's going on, except that there's a lot of road building going on and has been for years. And it's probably a violation of the shoreline master program after you get there. But you know how somebody wants to do a development, and so they're going, well, I don't have enough money right now, but I'm working my way into it, you know? Well, the road standard wouldn't be what it is once the development happened. And so once he got there, he'd have to do a whole new redesign of the whole road system. I think that's what you're talking about. So cut and fill can keep you out of trouble too.
So I will explain my confliction though with this, okay, because I want to look at it from all angles. One is, I don't necessarily personally, my own personal view is, you know, cutting big roads and hillsides and stuff like that, aesthetically it's not that great. Okay, that's my own personal opinion on that. However, I also value my property rights to be able to do something where I feel like, okay, I need to get, you know, I need to get up to this spot because the county has ordained that I have 20 acres, so I bought all 20 acres of this, and it's steep, and I need to get back to it because I want to use it. Okay, so, but then I go also to, okay, if I'm building this road to try to get houses back there, and I've driven, you know, lumber trucks on roads where it takes me 3 times to, you know, turn the hairpin, you know, backing up, that's not a very, good road, a well-built road to try to access residential houses, because if I can't turn my, 20-foot or whatever lumber truck around this corner, how is the fire truck gonna get up there? How's the ambulance gonna get up there? And how are those bigger vehicles, I mean, how's the concrete truck gonna get there just to pour the foundations? So, I mean, I'm conflicted over it. I think that if we looked at it and we tiered it somehow, it might work. I just,
A road that's served, like, you make the argument about emergency equipment, I suppose, no matter where you are. A road that services a working orchard is a different road than one that gets up to the 100 acres that they intend sometime to develop. And they should be different. I mean, there's no reason to build to the same standard. We don't have any way to involve ourselves even in that discussion if they just start building the road. And we encountered this from time to time where we then have to go back in and get into Donnybrook. Because they built the road looks fine, well, it looks fine, but it's not built to the right standard for what you want to do. Now, we have to do that lately because we have a lot of development activity. Whether that continues or not.
I have
So
a friend
what's-
who's got the staunchest, he's one of the staunchest private property rights advocates in the world. And they did a subdivision on his property. He didn't know what the rest of the subdivision looked like, because they didn't decide to access the last lot until 30 years later. And there's this road that goes across a steep hillside above his house, looks a bit like that. And all of a sudden, he realized that there's gonna be somebody driving off that road in the wintertime. And he went, how can they do that? How can the county let that happen? And I'm going, that wasn't a part of the rules at the time.
well, and so that's where I'm trying to find this balance of, is it a clearing and grading ordinance, or is it a road standard that you just have to meet?
The clearing and grading ordinance is primarily just to say, you're gonna make this big cut in the earth, maybe, I mean, and I hear you when it comes to you're on your own piece of property, you might be out in the woods somewhere, and it's like, it'd be nice if I could go back over there to that part of the property, and it doesn't take much to, if you got a cat, it doesn't take much thinking at all, you just get on and go over there, right?
I just try, it's funny, because in doing all this stuff, you wanna try to be, you wanna have a good balance of what's going on. I was thinking back to, I think 2 years ago here, I'm out, taking care of some varmints out in the back of our place, and here a sheriff's deputy, and this was prior to me being a county commissioner, here's a sheriff's deputy comes strolling out there, walking out there, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? And he said, well, we got a report that you're shooting at people, or shooting at the trail and stuff like that, and I'm like,
Oh, because the trail's there.
yeah, because the trail's there, and I was like, well, I grew up here, I know where all my backstops are, I'm out on my own property, and so I go back to that, and then start thinking about, okay, driving down the road and these, people that don't wanna see anything happen, and calling the cops and saying, hey, this guy's building the road, and go stop him, so.
And that happens too, I mean, I told you about, when, Devers is good at building orchards on steeper slopes. And they were up there with an excavator digging into the hillside, and the guy was saying that they're making a pit.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, well, I don't know, I think that's just the way they start the process of moving dirt so that they can build the orchard. And that's what it was, but, again, that I understand, people get freaked out when they see something happening, they're sure something's gonna happen in their neighborhood that didn't wanna happen. I think that's gonna happen no matter what the rules are, but.
Commissioners, if I might ask your indulgence, take a brief recess from this discussion, move to one of the items on your administrative agenda, so that under Sheriff Cole can participate in that.
Speaking of the sheriff, who's here?
Speaking of the devil, law enforcement's here, keeping an eye on them. The subject is M-Tank, the ceiling project down at the jail that came up a while back now, and it's kind of ebbed and flowed in terms of the discussion and budget and all sorts of things. But, come on. It's come up again. Your risk manager talked to me the other day. She says, you know, we really ought to move ahead with that. It's her belief that there is budget now allocated for the project. We got as far as the plan specifications and estimates, but it's been a number of years ago. Talking to Tanya, we're in agreement we probably ought to freshen that up. So what I had in mind, and we actually have a meeting Wednesday to go over the more specific logistics of this, but what I'm going to suggest in our discussion with the undersheriff, we go ahead and put out an RFQ, looking for an architect or engineer to do the plan specifications and estimates for the project, to actually prepare the bid packets that we can go out to advertise for contractors, have them respond to any questions, do a pre-bid tour if they believe that's necessary, have them evaluate the packets, bring a recommendation to you along with a proposed contract for award. Now that would, well, I can run this out of my operation, working with the undersheriff and his crew along the way. Once you get to construction contract, it'd be my suggestion, unless you want to pay whomever to do that, that we go ahead and release them, then have maintenance and the sheriff's office personnel actually monitor the project. The idea being that it's gonna have to be carefully coordinated with Under Sheriff Colt's personnel down there to make sure we don't get into security challenges. Your maintenance department likely can do that level of oversight. Once you get all of this done, it's a relatively straightforward project, other than coordinating with the sheriff's staff, making sure all that works. So what Under Sheriff and I are gonna chat about Wednesday with his staff is you just make sure we have a clear understanding in terms of who's doing what along the way. We had a little bump and jerk before with different folks kind of doing different things, and it didn't necessarily come together as smoothly as perhaps it could have. We can certainly avoid that this time by talking a little more up front. So I guess the $1 million question to you all is, it's our impression that budget has been allocated between what was already identified. Laney, do you remember, out of REIT, wasn't it? And then we have the Douglas County money?
No, it was out of, I was just looking at it here. It's
I budgeted 120,000 in
100
capital improvements.
120,000 in capital improvements, but then we also have the
Set aside.
193 fund, which is the jail improvement fund. And we would have to do, we got a $29,000 beginning fund balance in that, so we would have to do a supplemental within that fund if we want it, but that was specifically what that fund was for, was to do jail improvement things. So between the two, we should have enough money to do the project.
I would ask Under Sheriff Colt to share with you.
What's that?
Also have the 110. That was your mark for.
Juvenile in jail, it is, so.
How's that looking?
That one is, we got 200, should have about 229,000, I think, of carryover. The 160.
So is there kind of a guess what the PS&E might run?
Well, I mean, obviously the first step is for the hard-eyed professionals to figure out how much it's going to cost now to do this.
Yeah, no, after you select them,
Right, the first step, of course, the RFQ. But first negotiate a contract with whomever responds to the RFQ. They in turn work out the PSC and these documents. And where we draw this line is really up to you. I mean, the Undersheriff and I can come to our own meeting of the minds, but it just depends on how much you wanna pay to have done. Where we generally run into hiccups is if we draw this line too high, or too low, however you wanna look at it, on the ladder, I would recommend we take it through the bid packets and actual review of what the contractors submit. They come to you with a recommendation, give us a hand with the construction contract itself. Literally take it up to the point where you all are prepared to sign on the line with your contractor.
And
Then
then
you
the
can-
contractor takes over, and then the sheriff's office, along with maintenance, monitors the progress.
That would be my suggestion. Under sheriff observations?
No, I think, that would work the best, I think, for us. You know, as you know, the population down there right now kind of supports this effort. I mean, it'd be good to take advantage of that if we have the resources available to go ahead and do the project, so. This is about a third the size of the L-Tank one, if I'm not mistaken.
It's just a smaller project.
So cost-wise, I know there's a time differential in what things cost to do, but that's a way to look at it.
You got something to compare it to.
That was,
So, right,
do you have the jail population, do you know what it is right now?
124 today.
124, dude. That's good, thank you. So, that's one thing that we were talking about, that we were wondering if between the prosecutor and the sheriff's office and us, we'd have discussion because trustees, I mean, it would, you know, we used to be able to use a lot of trustees doing a lot of different things, and so.
So that does warrant a discussion.
Yeah.
I think that's.
We don't have to have it right now.
Yeah,
but I think
there's some dynamic changes, I think, since that was a real thing, going concern down here, so, but I can
If we
try
could
to
tee
go
that
with
up.
something to, get everybody in the same.
To get everybody talking about that so that we know, because we're always being asked for, you know, some trustees and not knowing, and with the jail population being down right now, you know, is it gonna remain down?
Population projections.
Right,
Right.
and the flavor of the population
Exactly.
has a
Yeah,
significant
yeah.
impact on that question.
Exactly.
The demographics.
Right.
Less need for housing.
Digest.
So if it sounds like the commissioners, too, are desirous of moving ahead, and I know the risk manager is eager to get this moving. I've heard nothing from the undersheriff to contradict that,
Absolutely not.
so, we'll go ahead and have our discussion Wednesday. We'll come back with a fine-tuned proposal and a draft RFQ for the commissioners to review.
Seems like the thing to do.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
It's good to see something happen, by the way.
Yes.
So, back to our discussion. What, to your observation, Commissioner, and call it what you will, the clearing and grading ordinance is a fairly common term. What that provides is the trigger for review. And that's been part of the roads that get built, for the most part, eventually get reviewed. But if it's tied to a subdivision, we don't get involved till they come to the door with a subdivision application. Short plat, whatever they're doing, conditional use permit for a wrecking yard, whatever. That's when we and Public Works get involved in the process. What the clearing, and it can be a very simple clearing and grading ordinance, all that is the permit that you can hook whatever level of review to that you all deem appropriate. And that's really what it does. It doesn't have to go beyond road construction. It can. It doesn't have to give the same level of scrutiny to every road, you can. It really depends on what your objectives are, if you want to move down this path, and the level of scrutiny you believe appropriate to the thing road is my focus, being constructed.
I wanna make sure everybody knows that Terry just doesn't, he's not just bringing this up out of the blue. This is something I kinda started talking about. I don't know if, you know, anybody else has talked about it or anything like that. So, I wanna make sure that the blame doesn't get put on you for bringing something just out of the blue. And
What tends to happen here.
well, I know it does, and so I don't want that to happen. But the reason that I say that is because I'm sitting here trying to think through, you know, if I'm sitting there and a flat piece of ground and I'm building my driveway out to the back of my 5-acre parcel, and I got the sheriff, you know, it comes down to what is this, how is this going to change what goes on? If I'm driving, right now, if I'm driving down the road and I see somebody cutting a road up the side of a hill, and I call and I go, oh my God, this guy's, you know, cutting up the hillside, what is the planning department, you know, what can you do? Nothing, right now?
We go and look,
You go and look, okay.
see if there's some kind of a critical areas violation or something else. Generally, there isn't a lot we can do about it. Because while some people believe critical areas definitions are much more expansive than they really are. You can actually build a road through a lot of stuff that some people might be surprised to learn you can build a road through. Once in a while we'll have a wetlands or some similar violation, or shoreline master programs where now it often pops up because you have that vegetation management area, which is bigger than it has been in the past.
Mhm.
But most of the time, there isn't too much that we can do about it.
So what do you think about this? Is it overstepping? Is it too much regulation? Is it?
I like the way it is right now myself.
Oh, that's fine. Like I said, I'm thinking through it, Chris.
I think it is your fault.
You can blame it on me. You can absolutely blame it on me.
But-
I at least started the discussion, so we
Over
know.
many years, it's been a conversation by many, observing the need for one. Now, that has to do with various landowners adjacent to certain things that have occurred.
And if we create a clearing and grading ordinance, then it puts a lot more pressure on the planning because we don't have a code enforcement officer.
Now, planning still gets calls, one way or the other.
I mean, the one thing I maybe to kind of outline is we already do review for clearing and grading. Every site analysis that comes in for a building permit, we'll review it in terms of how much ground are you disturbing, where is the ground you're disturbing, relationship to critical areas, shoreline master program. We do that sort of review with every site analysis that's going to build something, it's going to construct something that's going to disturb the ground. Conditional use permits, we do that same level of review depending upon the nature of the conditional use permit. Marijuana farms, they're disturbing ground, we lay it against critical areas, shoreline master program, all that stuff. Recreation, whatever. We always do some level of review for discharge and that sort of thing. So it's not that we don't do that level of review. We do it. We actually do it fairly regularly. Where we occasionally run into a challenge is before they apply. And that happens even with some of the other permits we do. Someone will come in with a site analysis for their building permit. They've already dug the hole for the foundation. We take a look and they can't do it where they wanted to, or some of the problems popped up. Okay. They don't build, Dan's still with me? Come on up, come on. And actually, I do believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you've stopped doing the foundation-only permits for that very reason, haven't you, or do you still do them?
No,
from
we
time to
still will do a foundation only, but they have to provide all the plans to us, yeah.
Well, you
They have
know,
to provide a site analysis to you.
Right, oh yeah,
Yeah,
they have to
so they're
approve
not-
water,
They're not
septic.
just going, you're not just saying, yeah, go ahead and dig a hole wherever you want.
No.
It's already been approved.
And we get asked all the time, well, can I go ahead and dig? And our first question to them is, do you have your site analysis approval? I wouldn't start digging until you have that, because you don't know, you know. Some don't pay attention to us and start digging anyway, but.
where we saw, you know, and it depends on where the development's happening, right? Because you don't see it everywhere, but where we saw it happen in a big way was, for instance, there was some development going on at the Smith Point development,
Okay.
Legacies. And, you know, first off, you know, you're building and you're moving dirt, moved it into the shoreline setback. Cost those contractors, not the contractors, I don't think, I think it cost the landowner a pretty good sum of money to take it all back out. And then, while they were taking it back out, you get all the agencies there because you got a shoreline violation. And right next to it, here's a whole big excavation project going on without any consideration or permit, and it happens to be partially in a wetland. And it's like, the landowner calls up and says, hey, am I in trouble? And I'm going, I didn't know, these guys just happened to stumble across your development. The contractor convinced the landowner that that was okay. And, you know, really, you know, I mean, if, you know, you had, the site analysis would have fixed it probably, right? I mean, but all they were gonna do was get ready to plan out a development next door. They weren't really doing the development yet. And so they got in deep without, you know, any kind of a consideration, and you gotta consult with the county to move dirt, especially in shoreline, of course. You know, you'd think you'd know that, but those are times when you know, you think scratching the ground a little bit is one thing, but when you start moving dirt in a big way, you know, it's sometimes worth having something in place. But I think our conversation is important to go. Should we or shouldn't we? But I think more importantly is what would it look like?
Yeah, that's the thing that I'm trying to figure out is, you know, you try to figure out, okay, is it the chicken or the egg? I mean, do you want to allow people to, or should people just be able to do whatever they want to do at their own risk? And then when they come to you and say, hey, this is how I've done it, and you say, well, sorry, that doesn't meet the expectation of what we need, you know, and they get grumpy, well, too bad, you went out and you made your own choice to go out and do that. You know, or do you front load that and say, well, you can't do this unless you do it our way, because we want to make sure that you're doing it to a standard that will, you know, be appropriate for what you're doing. You know, if you're only digging a 2-track to go up and water your cows, then hey, whatever, if you're side by side you get up there, you're side by side you can get up there. If you're planning on putting a residential development up on the top of that hill, and you need to get machinery and equipment and everything else in there, then, you know, it has to have these curves, these grades, stuff like that. So it's, I don't know, I'm very torn with, you know, this one after I was driving around and thinking about it and you know, just thinking about the amount of regulation that we apply to people and, you know, where we're trying to go with that. I need to think more on it before I can say, yeah, let's go start.
I don't have a draft in front of you.
Yeah, no, I do.
Take a look at it.
No, I mean, it could fall squarely under the stigma of overregulation. And I would say that you have to answer a lot of people's questions about that, and I would give it some consideration. It's the pros and cons of it, and I think more than anything else, maybe some examples, so that you might know how far we go with something like that, if we do it at all. You know, so.
Yeah, it's hard to impose my own aesthetic views on anybody, you know, I can't do that.
Well, not just, aesthetics is one issue, but there's a whole bunch of, you know, stormwater issues that we've gotten calls ourselves over, you know, how come the water's coming down to my place? Well, because they decided to do that up there. And you happen to be second on the scene, and you can live with it. You know, it's.
And to Commissioner Branch's point made from time to time, that, you know, part of the discussion would have to involve what would be the purpose behind it. If the purpose is aesthetics, view shed and whatnot, that's a different discussion, not a good or bad discussion, but it's a different discussion. If it's public safety, that's yet another discussion. I mean, you can actually direct it strictly to just construction standards.
Right.
You know, if you're gonna build it here, you gotta build it this way. If you're gonna build it for this purpose, you gotta build it this way. That's a different discussion.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, if it's flat and you know, this is how many people you're servicing, this is how big it has to be. If you're servicing more, it has to be wider, da. If it starts on an incline, you know, it has to be you know, we have standards out there that.
Your current county engineer is, and we'll have this discussion in more detail when we get into the draft environmental impact statement and whatever comes out of that. But he has some concerns in terms of settlement pattern as it relates to your primitive road system primarily. And his concern is, of course, how are we going to orchestrate, what if we're gonna allow it, how are we gonna orchestrate the improvements of the road?
How are we not gonna have Commissioner Dietrich getting called every single night saying, hey, my road's a lead pit?
As an example, and that's perhaps the other side of the coin under the banner of public safety. You get a house that you can't get to unless you have a tracked vehicle.
And there are roads like that.
There are roads like that, and you know, and one can say, well, too bad, primitive road, get a helicopter. You know, that's hard to say sometimes.
No, there's one development in Meadow that was developed with a funny road that goes up it, and these guys played with that road for years and years and years, and actually, I don't know if the county ever was a part of the conversation about it. You know, there were a few fights over the road when somebody made an improvement, made a shortcut, and who could get on it and things like that. But honestly, it's just one of those kind of things that happen. Steep hillside, build the road in.
Well, you look at the one at Woods Canyon there where this kid got killed in that fire. I mean, that's one of those ones where you hit that first hairpin and you cannot get a truck longer than about 18 foot around that hairpin without coming off, you know, one side of it.
Well,
And there's, I think that road services 4 or 5 houses maybe up there.
Dan goes off into the hinterlands far more than we do doing his
Yeah.
inspections.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'd build a road so the building official couldn't get up. That's the main.
Yeah. No, but I mean, there's safety, you know, there's safety elements of, you know, it's like, if I'm gonna be charging money for lots that I've developed, then I should be able to say, yes, safety personnel can get into those developments. I mean, that's just the way it should be. But like I said, it's, you know, I started thinking about it, and I am the one that brought it up. And I do think about the overreaching, you know, government and, you know, all of the things that they put on people. And you try to figure out where is that balance between making sure that people do things correctly so they don't have to do them again,
Well, you know, the thing is that happens to, I mean, just to add this to it, is that I do something to a piece of land I have, and I sell it to somebody, and they sell it to somebody, and they sell it to somebody. And then that somebody lives with ramifications of everything that's been done as well. So if it wasn't coverted property or something like that, I mean, it's beware, buyer beware, right?
And that's where I'm talking about that balance. It's like, okay, if I go and I'm gonna buy a house, okay, I should probably make sure that the foundation's good. I should probably, make sure that the septic system's good, and make sure I can get power to a site if I need to get power to it.
And what can I do to improve this site?
Right.
By the local, so.
And so, it's kind of like society today, it's going more towards, not holding people accountable for what they do. And so as government, do you let people make those mistakes and figure it out? Or do you try to?
No, I think we ought to look at what it could look, what it might look like, because I think about a lot of stuff about big pieces of land and land that I've been involved with that is ranch land, own lot land, and I honestly can't imagine somebody coming up to me and saying, you can't go over there with,
Right.
and the times that I've seen it, that it turned out ugly was basically the only reason that it was a big deal is because they went over there and went over to the other guy's property and started messing around with it. That's what people will do from other areas. But really, when it comes to those big pieces and you see roads built on them, you see people like out here at the Tim's Ranch, for instance, where, they got, they mined out there, they did things. Do you think that looking back, that family would go, we had to do what? To go over here and dig around, I mean, it's a big place, so I understand. It's just that the more we find ourselves with land being subdivided and we get closer and closer together, that's where I begin to get concerned about it. And then we have some shoreline rules that it would be helpful, I think, to be able to say, hey, wait a minute, you're scratching the earth here and you're right in, you're getting in the shoreline here, you got some rules that are gonna come and bite you really hard. And when we've seen some developments, I've had to go on the scene here at like Palmer Lake and they've already done something and then you're going, yeah, well, they're not talking about forgiving them, they're talking about the permits they gotta get to take it back out.
Right.
And that's
permits
not a very happy scene to show up at either. I really don't like that.
Maybe a way to kind of break out future discussions, as I assume we'll have them, is it's obviously a different step to take a situation where you would never have told them what to do, and now you're talking about telling them what to do, versus the situation where you're going to tell them what to do.
Right.
It's just a question of when.
No,
And we really have a mix of that
Yeah.
in this discussion. Some of the roads that people build, we never get involved with because there's never a permit attached to it. Others, we eventually do, because sooner or later they come in and apply for whatever they built the road for. So it wasn't a question of if, just a question of when. So we
Right.
really have kind of two different subsets of the discussion.
Right, and there's one, I mean, you go right across the river here where there's a piece of property, and for years and years and years, hauled in fill, it's gotten filled in there, hauled in fill with the anticipation of someday being able to develop the property. Sooner or later, this guy's gonna go over there when they say we want to build something, you go, I don't know if you got the compaction here. Because he didn't know they had the compaction here. So then it becomes a different issue, and sometimes I saw one in Orville where everybody just watched. Well, wonder how long they're gonna keep doing that, and wait till they find out. And it's like, you hate to see that happen.
I know.
You hate to see that happen. I hate to be the guy that shows up on site and be the person that says, oh, by the way, looks real nice.
Listening to the discussion, let me come up with some examples. I mean, obviously, I have nothing in front of you now, and that's by design, we're just talking about this stuff. We come up with some examples, maybe a little structure to the discussion, we'll have it again.
I think one of the most important things too is that, and you brought up a couple of things in our zoning discussions and things like that, and that is concerned about, like, a landowner wants to do this, they can, or in this case, you know, somebody stepping on your toes for something that seems relatively minor. Those are the kind of things I think we should look at and go, well, let's avoid that.
Yeah, and I wanna avoid that too. I wanna avoid the part where the sheriff is trying to show up at your doorstep every single time
Right.
for whatever you're doing. I mean, that's just, I don't want that. But, you know, when we start talking about subdividing property, okay? I think that there should be a plan. If you want to subdivide your property, you should have a plan in place for how are you gonna get, you know, how are people gonna access these lots? How are people going to get power to these lots? How are people going to get internet to these lots? You know, even when you talk about exempt, I know people are, you know, they're all about the exempt segs and just being able to say, okay, I'm making 4 20-acre blocks and that's it, and I don't have to do anything. I'm just gonna do my exempt seg and I wanna sell 4 20-acre blocks or 5 20-acre blocks. But depending on how those lay out, it's like, if you don't have an easement to get, you know, if they're all stacked like this to the river, like what we seen the other day, in those little lots, and you don't have an easement going through, and somebody's fighting over an easement, and, you know, you got all these issues, instead of it just being laid out in the subdivision plan, that, okay, this is where water, power, sewer, all your infrastructure is gonna go, and this is where your road's gonna go, and this is how it's gonna serve these lots.
Well, when I think about that stuff, I think about, you know, subdivision and private property rights. I think about this piece of property right here that I own, and I wanna be able to do something on it. And then when I subdivide it, I've created, so it's a short plat, I've created 4 more property rights owners.
I know.
And I created a scenario where they then have to argue their property rights over some issues that I created. And not everybody thinks about that. That's short-term over long-term thinking, and that's.
And the other thing too is that I believe truly that a well thought out subdivision, that people are going to be more apt to purchase a piece of property in a well thought out subdivision than just, oh, there's a random parcel of property that I think I might want to buy, even though I don't know how I'm gonna access it, and I don't know any of the, you know, any of the rules or regulations.
Yeah, it's worth paying somebody to help you do that.
We do have examples of that.
Mhm.
Had the phone call back 6 weeks or so ago now, wondering what else they might be able to do, because they've been actively marketing the subdivision for, you know, when the subdivision was a series of short plats. Under development agreement, they haven't sold a lot.
I have a question for you, kind of based around the subdivisions and around what we were talking about with that pot farm the other day.
Right.
And everything. So, can we get, so public school and public transportation, okay? You have bus stops all over this county, okay? And if I got a subdivision where the only way for my kids to get to school is to walk by this pot farm to get to the bus stops. So that is one thing that I'm really concerned about when I looked at these maps is, you know, where is Okanagan's, the school district's bus stops? Where's Omac's, you know, bus stops at? Because there is laws against citing retail businesses within so close to public transportation. But but yet I don't know that there anything exists with grows.
Your advisory committee, back up a step farther, your advisory committee actually wrestled with that. And the code you recently adopted has certain setbacks for certain activities. They are not necessarily consistent with state law, but the state law allows some local flavor, if you will, depending upon what you want it to do. So it was discussed, there was not complete agreement. It's the exact same discussion we've had with all the rest of it. Some wanted huge setbacks, others didn't believe that was necessary. Your code actually creates a setback with some exceptions, depending upon topography and that sort of thing.
So can you get do you know, do the school districts have in GIS, do they have their bus stops mapped?
I don't know.
Can you find out?
We can find out.
Because I think that would be a good, another piece of that land use thing, you know, where we're sitting there looking at something and we go, well, that looks like a development to me, right? And look, there's a bus stop right there.
We'll find that out.
Okay, thank you.
We can come back to our discussion on another day. I'll bring you some additional information. We'll create some mapping for you, or bring back the mapping. We'll go ahead and print off a big zone map
Yeah, that'd be great.
and hang it up here somewhere.
Yeah, I don't know if you'd want to, just think about it. Maybe you might want to divide it, I don't know. Our zone map looks kind of, it's such a big county that if it's in a couple pieces, it might be helpful.
I would like a little more in-depth discussion on that 5 multifamily units though, because I think that's something that we could because I have heard about that a lot. And I think it's something that we could look at and we could go, okay, maybe the planning commission can, you know, give us a recommendation on what they think, or maybe we can come up with kind of a backbone of, this is kind of what we think it looks like, and ship it to the planning commission, saying, hey, we need to fix this piece here, because I think that needs to be fixed.
We'll bring in the zone map. We'll go ahead and print one out. It'll be a little busy, but we can make it pretty good size, so it'll have some value. And of course, we can put it on the screen. We can break that up into bite-sized pieces. For instance, we can pull out the different landmarks and how they're situated. The Met-How zoning, we can isolate the rest of the zoning. We can isolate. We'll put together a slideshow.
It's a good piece to be able to consult it. I tell you, I'll bet you that if you do that, there will be people that come to meetings here that you'll find them standing around the map and looking at it. Honestly.
Now, that isn't in the Met-How, and that is not in the Met-How review district, is that true? That density?
The multifamily,
Yeah,
no, it's in R1, R5, and R20.
Okay, yeah, not in MVD.
That's kind of one of the reasons that maybe just Met-How Valley zoning itself, because it's more detailed and would have that separate map.
There are some zones that allow multifamily in Met-How, but that language in that form doesn't.
It's not in the MVD 5 and the MVD 20. Or MVRD or whatever it is.
We'll put together some additional information for you. If I may, commissioners, but Dan, any observations you would throw into the good of the order here?
No, sir.
Leave that one alone.
Then, moving to item 1 on your administrative agenda, I would ask you to convene as the Tenasket EMS governing body for purposes of outreach.
So I move to adjourn as the Okanagan Board of County Commissioners and reconvene as the Tenasket EMS District.
Second motion.
Motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
Your normal vouchers. Contract payment to Lifeline.
2 months worth, February and March,
Yes.
okay. So I move to approve the February vouchers for the contract to Lifeline in the amount of $21,700.
Second motion?
Motion second, discussion. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
I move to approve the March vouchers for the contract to Lifeline in the amount of $21,700.
Second.
Motion second, discussion. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
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 What's the date today? Is that all we need to do?
It's all your business as Tenasket EMS.
We move to adjourn as the Tenasket EMS District and reconvene as the Okanagan Board of County Commissioners.
Second motion?
Okay, motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
Last item, Commissioners, remind you your public hearing on Tenasket Airport Safety Overlay is next Monday, 1:30. So we'll have that in front of you. We did, the crew was able to manipulate the mapping, so we should be able to bring to you for the attachment the actual configuration of the zones over the assessor's overlay. So there'll be some opportunity to adjust that to lot lines or whatever you might be inclined to do. That is your agenda for today, Commissioners. Anything for me?
That is how Ferry County is doing the variable speed roads for the ATVs and ATVs. So, the Senate bill or the House bill that we were working on came out of the House, went to the Senate, came out of committee, and good old Conservation Northwest jumped in and did the same thing they did last year. Hobbs put a striker bill in there that confused the whole situation once again. And that's their strategy, is obstruction. So I think in lieu of that, if we're just gonna continually to beat us up in the legislation, when all we're trying to do is streamline the language and make it less confusing and cost the county less all the way around in signage and everything else, we need to convert to this and start doing roads on that RCW.
What would be the approach you want to take identifying connectors, where at this point the speed limit's an obstacle?
That's where it starts.
I just need to get a bigger picture of it. And then in terms of what's being proposed, how it works.
One thing that would be important to know, I think, is that RCW allows us to change speed limits based on types of vehicles, time of day, gives us actually a lot of leeway in changing speed limits.
So you post it, you double post it or something like that? Like
Yeah, because it
like-
specifically
like
says types
a-
of vehicles in there.
Yeah, I was
However,
gonna get a picture of their signage. Somebody showed it to me the other day, and I'm trying to think who was that picture. Might have been Larry and Joe.
We kind of had this discussion a while back, and I don't know that we really put a fine point. I know Ferry County, was it, tried it?
Tried what?
The,
Oh, yeah, they've been doing it.
they say some time ago now.
Yeah, they've been doing it for a couple of years.
Okay, well, we just haven't talked about it recently, because we were in the process of identifying roads and all those sorts of things, so.
but my question is, you got two different RCWs that you're dealing with. One says that we can do a lot with speed limits. So is the WATV RCW right now Cause is it governed by how fast the WATV can go? Or, in other words, if I say that speed, that road, a WATV can only go 35 miles an hour on, but any other vehicle can go 50 on. Does that mean that I can open it up to WATVs because they can only do 35 miles an hour on that road?
Where we got into discussion before, and the magic and the discussion, if you will, is, and you're heading in the direction, when you get into 46, I guess it is, that portion that deals with WATVs, it says you can open a road with a speed limit of 35 miles an hour or less than 30 miles an hour. It's all set.
Great.
This, where you see this implemented on the ground, speed limit's 25, 20 when children are present, or something like that. Cars 70, trucks 60, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Going around a corner, 40 miles an hour.
That's sort of, well, your advisory sign. So the question is, when you read the WATV section, does that mean so long as only WATVs can go 35 miles an hour? Or does it mean the road
Yeah, it has to be.
has to be 35 mile an hour? And then Ferry County, I don't know if anybody's taking a challenge to me, I don't know. Ferry County's been doing it. We
Well,
have,
early on, as you recall, before 1632, you know, we dedicated Horse Spring Coulee to Loomis. That's a 50 mile an hour road. And because it was a link to a loop, and we did the same thing from Happy Hill into Campanelli. And it's worked perfect. There's been no problems whatsoever. Most ATV, ORVs and WATVs on a hard surface road can travel at 50 miles an hour.
just sound like commissioners are at least interested in the discussion.
Got
Is that
to
accurate?
know what
I'll,
it looks like to.
I'll take it up with the county engineer, and we'll take it first from the approach, what roads would lend themselves as connectors in light of what we've already opened.
Yeah.
That perhaps this is a vehicle to create those routes. I don't know if there were other roads that the commissioners were interested in just opening, but the speed limit was too much. I know we've actually identified segments of road where, because they're paved, the speed limit de facto was 50 miles an hour, and you actually identified a few that you were gonna talk about reducing speed limits on to create the connector.
Well, we have some ORV open roads, we have some roads open to ORVs that are 50 miles an hour roads.
You're allowed to do that with the ORVs, of course.
Right. Which is,
You're allowed to do that with the
That's what we're
ORVs.
trying to
I know,
straighten out.
I know.
What we've been constantly
that's all we have to
straighten out in Olympia, and
What did they put in?
we always get, at the very, very last minute, you know, one of the Democrats like Hobbs, you know, these special interest groups that go in there and throw a monkey wrench in the works. And all they're doing is obstructing, and they know that's their strategy. So let's go around them.
What was the, did they put a rider in the bill, or what?
An amendment, a striker amendment,
And what did they?
change the language of the whole thing, just like they did last time.
What that was, so that's a Senate, no, is that a?
It was
Senate?
1028, House Bill, 1028, I believe. I just tried to find it, and I couldn't find it.
1028, right?
I think so. Yeah, 1028.
So was that the substitute bill then? substitute Senate bill report.
I might have accidentally deleted that damn thing. Does that go to deleted items to see if I did? No?
I'll go ahead and touch bases with county engineer. I don't know if he's been tracking that or no. He was for a while, I know, so we'll come back with some observations.
Their tires are soft and their axles are fixed and are not meant for operating on hard. Not? You gotta have DOT approved tires and they got IFS on most of them. That's it. I'm reading this Senate bill, it's the Senate bill report.
No, I don't know what I did with it, that red line.
Well, sometimes in the drive back from Olympia, things change again.
Sometimes it'll change.
You never necessarily know exactly what's going on. I'll say, I'll take it up with Josh, and we'll come back. Anything else for me, Commissioner? Very good.
I was trying to think of something complicated, but I couldn't come up with it.
I'll be over there.
Okay. Who will be at Newark on Friday? You here?
For sure. Yeah.
So I got this thing that came
But
up.
that's not this.
No, that's the following Friday. No,
No, it's this Friday, isn't it?
this
It's
Friday.
next Friday.
Next.
I had it
Next
on a
Friday.
tentative.
It's next
this Friday.
Friday.
Yeah, okay.
Yep, next Friday.
I can keep it. Good. Then you might wanna go to this thing on healthcare. I will do that.
What is that?
This is, so this is the ACH's
Oh, yeah.
annual summit where they talk about where we all are with all that stuff. There's a cartoon that goes along with it, kind of helps a little. And apparently it's all day. I think-
Where's it at?
I think it is at, this is a really very informative thing, but I think it's at Moses Lake at the college.
Oh,
They just tell me about it, they don't tell me what the time is. Linda Evans-Barlett just said it. But I think the way they're talking, it's probably at community college, or Big Bend Community College. seemed like the right place for it. I'm glad it didn't come out on the same day. I think that'll be, Newick's here, right, so.
Finally.
Yeah, perfect.
Commissioner Branch,
Mm.
there is time on Monday, the 15th, for making it possible.
Okay,
So, putting her down at 4 o'clock.
did I forward her